One of the greatest burdens placed on young people today is the belief that they must discover their own truth, define their own identity, and create their own purpose. We hear this crazy "you do you" phrase throughout the broader culture. And every day our children are surrounded by these competing voices that tell them who they should become and what they should believe. Today we're joined by Joshua Weir, author of In, Not Of, Firm Foundations for Life, to explore how we can help the next generation build a biblical worldview that anchors their identity, shapes their relationships, and gives them the confidence to stand firm in an increasingly complicated world. Join us for this episode of Basecamp Live.
Mountains. We all face them as we seek to influence the next generation. Get equipped to conquer the challenges, summit the peak, and shape exceptionally thoughtful, compassionate, and flourishing human beings. We call it Ancient Future Education for raising the next generation. Welcome to Basecamp Live. Now your host, Davies Owens.
Welcome to another episode of Basecamp Live. Davies Owens, your host here on the journey, raising up the next generation with you. If you've been listening for a while, you know that one of the things I enjoy most about these weekly podcasts is getting to introduce you to thoughtful people who help us make sense of the world that our children are growing up in. You know, we spend time looking at things that are happening in the culture, best practices with parenting, and understanding Christian education and classical education even better. So I am always curious, what is on your mind? We've been doing a lot of work on the Basecamp Live website, trying to help organize the many episodes we've had over the past 10 years and looking at the episodes that have statistically had the most downloads, which is not just the newest ones. A lot of the older ones with this very evergreen content continue to be of help and value to people. And I'm always curious what is most helpful to you, what's on your mind. As always, I love hearing from you. info@basecamplive.com. Drop me a note. Let me know what you're thinking about these days. As always, I'd like to recognize a couple of schools that are part of the Basecamp Live and Zipcast community. Amanda Miller is head of school at Ordo and Morris Classical Academy in Fairhope, Alabama, and Jeff Johnson is head at Bradford Academy in Mebane, North Carolina. Thank you both, your teachers, your parents, and your school community for being part of the faithful partners that work with us on this great work we do of raising up the next generation. We need each other on the journey. Hey, if you're encouraged by these conversations each week, I'd also love to invite you to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, as well as subscribe to our newsletter. If you're not already signed up, you can do that on the Basecamp Live website. It just helps you stay in touch with the many things that we're doing each week. Our guest today, Joshua Weir, is an advisor, an author, speaker, and a consultant who has spent more than 25 years helping individuals and ministries and organizations think deeply about faith and purpose and community. He studied at Westmont College and Harvard University, and Josh has devoted much of his work to equipping people with an integrated, Christ-centered understanding of life and culture. His newest book, In, Not Of, Firm Foundations for Life, explores some of the defining questions facing this generation. Like, where does identity come from? How do we know it's true? And what does it really mean to be in the world but not of it? He and his family live in the Texas Hill Country, where he continues his work through his organization 2415. Also, a quick shout out and thanks to our partners on this episode, the Herzog Foundation, to our friends at the Wise Phone, to Robert Littlejohn and Chuck Evans for their excellent resource, wisdom, and eloquence, and of course, to Zipcast. You know, one of the things that we often talk about is that formation does not happen by accident. That's why we have Basecamp Live to encourage you each week. You know, schools also need to be intentional in their communication rhythms to parents, to connect them to their shared mission and community. That is really the heart behind why we build Zipcast, to help schools communicate consistently, to tell stories and real human voices that matter, and to strengthen the partnership between home and school. You can learn more at zipcast.media. Well, without further ado, here's my conversation with Joshua Weir. Josh, welcome to Basecamp Live.
Thanks for having me, Davies. I'm excited to be here.
It's a joy to have you, Josh, and I love the fact that you have been listening to Basecamp Live for some time period. How did you find out about us?
Well, and being in the classical world, Basecamp Live is kind of a basic way to engage with the ideas of classical day to day. There are so many episodes in the backlog that you can basically just keep diving in and go, I need to learn that. I need to learn that. Wow. So I was on the board at Petra Academy in Bozeman. Shout out to Petra. It's a great place. But, when you come into the community, you need to understand so many different things. And Basecamp's just a great way to hear perspectives, understand some of the things that are going on, and then see a whole lot of vision for what different people in different places see inside a classical Christian education. So,
well, thanks for that encouragement. I know I'd asked you before. I mean, you got involved. I guess your daughter was at that age of trying to sort through the school decision, and you guys got plugged in, and that was kind of your first entree, I guess, to really being in a local school environment. Is that right?
It is. So it's interesting. A lot of the different things appealed to us. My wife actually was a missionary kid. So her parents were missionaries to England. So the similarities of some of the English school system and some of the plans within, rhetoric school and things like that were very much familiar, and the ability to kind of look at that and say, wow, this really does produce something great. But mostly the thing that resonated was the care. Our daughter got so much care inside of class, with teachers, outside. That was really the burden that we went, wow, this is amazing. And then of course we found out, wow, then they teach the students this, they learn Latin, they've got a violin in their hand, they're doing all these amazing things that you don't get quite in other educational experiences.
Yeah. No,
we were sold. I wouldn't say we were sold easy, but we were like,
right,
this is great.
Because you grew up in what environment yourself? I mean, was it?
So I, as much as I can push it down here and there in places that don't like it, I grew up in Southern California. So I am a Californian.
Yeah.
And the bonus of that is that I grew up in Orange County, California, and just surrounded by a wealth of people that were actually pursuing Christ, people that lived it, communities that did it, people that built into me. Wow. They showed me what Christ-centered living was. They showed me what a community looks like, how to be responsible in it. I feel like someone who's just been given much in my life, and I've wanted to engage with students and, young adults and others to just to continue that.
It's a lot of, and again, this gets into the book that that you've just written, we're going to be talking about, because you have had experiences working with youth and young people and trying to connect them not only to the gospel, but just sorting out how to navigate the world. So that's been formative, sounds like, to you as well.
Yeah. I started out wanting to be a youth pastor, and then I recognized that God had given me different skill sets than your average youth pastor. And I ended up having a lot of some of those deeper conversations with students, which was great, but that's not every student at 12 or 14. And
Right.
so there's different energies and different time periods. And I think when I began writing in the early 2000s, there was this shift happening, kind of the infusion of ideology into everything. Mm-hmm. And there were breakdowns in community and tribalism and the beginnings of this postmodern shift of ideas. And you can have that kind of abstract conversation with a 16, 17-year-old. That's hard to bring to an 11-year-old
Right.
at times. And they can get pieces of it, but they start making concrete thoughts out of it.
Right.
And so what I had seen was a lot of people more connecting over brokenness than kind of the hope we have in Christ. And so along with postmodernism that naturally rejects authority, there's some complications there where trust starts breaking down. If a leader fails, it's monumental. And it's like, oh, this is a world now I have to deconstruct. And I think that's, kind of in that time period, we saw this rise of personal truth over objective truth. Right. So I think it's also a place where, you can build a convergence of worldview, of community, of Christ-centeredness,
Right.
And transformation by our minds. That's it's on the back of the book. We're there to be transformed by the renewing of our minds. Right. And I don't know how many young people really think about that. They think about, what am I going to do? But
right. No, I love that you've written this book, which I think even the title, "In, Not of the World, Firm Foundations for Life." And I know you're referencing the John 17 passage that we're to be in the world, but not of it. And boy, that seems more relevant than ever. I mean, we can't help but be in the world, and our kids, even if they're in a classical Christian school, are in the world, and the world is now bleeding into every nook and cranny of their lives, especially through technology. And so it's very, the world is stacked against us more than ever in terms of formation of purpose and identity. And so again, how can we be more proactive? Because I think a lot of times parents, whether you're in a classical Christian school or not, sort of see the Christian school as this sort of antidote. I'll just drop them off at the Christian school and they'll get sort of their Jesus fix, and whatever bad stuff is coming at them, it'll kind of counteract all of that. Maybe unaware of the severity of those forces around them. So help us understand again, what are you seeing maybe even just in the last, 5 years or so that has sort of shifted in terms of that intensity of the world coming at us?
Yeah, I think, we've had a rise in individualized culture. The idea of your main character energy. People want to be at the center, subjective opinions, their personal truth. One of the complications as I was doing research for this was talking to people in their mid to late 20s, who are still afraid of asking questions because tech should be able to answer it for them. They should be able to Google it. They should be able to use AI. And their friends are like, wait, you haven't solved that for yourself yet? And they don't have it solved for themselves. They just went to Google and said, what do I think about this?
Wow.
So there's an embarrassment that comes even into, I don't know. And I think that trickles down. I think, how do you grow your understanding of truth? How do you validate what's good? We don't have a good answer for where AI actually sources its information. So how do we know when it gives us something that it's actually true? So take that down. One of the things that I was pleased about in the school we're now at in Texas is that they have a program with a local camp where they have students come in and lead students. And so students could feel like, hey, this is another student helping me understand these things, because otherwise they're left to technology or they're left to whatever a peer says. I think the two things that kind of have emerged in my mind that really direct things. I'm a fan of Bonhoeffer, and I think Bonhoeffer's comment in Life Together of Satan's desire is to turn me in on myself to the extent I become a destructive force in community. Man, how much of Western culture is experiencing people turned in on themselves and destroying their community? It's a hard one, because people are just trying to come up with their own identity, understand who they are, see a worldview, but they don't see the wake that comes after them when they just turn on themselves. And I think paired with that is, kind of the doctrine of screw tape, distraction, criticism, habit drift, polarize people, polarize others, and slowly yourself be nudged off course. And I think between those two things, even in Christian communities, we have things that are left or right of center. They're not so much orthodoxy, orthopraxis. They get lost in the weeds. And it's harder and harder to get that unity that we're called to in the Spirit. We're, the community that is really what helps us keep Christ at the center, accountability, responsibility, all those things. So our culture doesn't want those things for the most part. They want to be autonomous. I like to take it back to the garden. I mean, Satan said, if you know everything and you can do it on your own, hey, you got it. Right. And if there's two things that are the opposing pillars that are in our culture, it's your autonomy and your knowledge make you distinct and your perspective distinct. And that's the best thing that you can do.
So I want to tie two things together. You reference a scripture, which, is so critical, that we are to have the mind. We're to have the mind of Christ. I mean, ultimately we're thinking people, and we're not just brains on a stick. So, Romans 10 talks about the fact that we're to follow, that our heart is part of what allows us to really believe deeply, and it formulates us. So we've got this kind of head-heart, maybe perceived tension, and we're in a world today that's really community driven. So, I mean, what you're talking about, and I know you had written The Community of the Faithful, which really explored that idea of identity and the basis of friendship and community. And I know the last chapter in your new book is really talking about friendship. We're going to get into some of the solutions, but my observation question is we're definitely to form our minds, but our minds are not just, off in the corner reading a book. We're formed in community, and we are sheeple. And so I think that, we're following other people around. So how do we both see ourselves as thinking people, but also we're going to probably be more influenced by the community, regardless of how, solid that community is. If everybody's, in a gang and everybody's killing each other, then all of a sudden that's what it means to be long and to be a part of a group of people. So that community drive is stronger sometimes than our thoughts. So how do you frame those two seemingly maybe somewhat opposite kind of poles in our lives?
Well, I think one of the elements of community when it's based in Christ that's different, and I definitely hold a particular view on this. I'm a Colson Fellow, so I see some good 4-part frameworks that go around the way we view the world and the way that we view how we interact with the world. But I think when it comes to the values that are in community, they translate to values in the person. And one of the things that when I've worked with organizations and ministries to this end and consulting them, there's a values basis that we make decisions out of. And a whole lot of people don't understand what that values basis is. They may look at their career and say, you know what, if I just got that really high bar salary, everything would be good. But then they forget the fact that maybe one of their main values is family. And so our world has got us, whether we're in a community or out of community, looking at parsing out these decisions by maybe things that don't actually pan out to hit the value that we want. And I think that's something that, as not just heads on a stick, our hands have to interact with that. We have to interact with the type of friends that we make, the voices that we listen to, the people we serve with, and how we serve with them. I think one of the truths is that life is a messy thing. There's a reality that life is going to have difficulty and it's going to have some ugliness that we have to deal with. And to paint a picture, especially to young people, that it's this, convenient spiral upward towards success is a disservice to them, because anyone who's experienced real community knows that it comes with long conversations and wrestling through details and relationships that don't always do the right thing, but your dedication to that relationship, your fidelity, your faithfulness plays into how the community is bettered. And then as a result, how you're bettered by the community.
Yeah. Well, let's take a break, and when we come back, I want to dig in really to this critical key part of the book, which is how do you build these firm foundations through those communities? So once you've chosen a community, because you are going to be, the old adage, you're going to be the same person you are today 5 years from now, except for the people you're hanging out with and the books or the things that you're reading. So clearly those are pretty critical decisions, especially parents, when they think about, I'll put my child in the classical Christian school, but they'll spend the rest of their time from 301 after, with a bunch of people on the team sport and going into different things in the neighborhood. And then you wonder why the net effect is maybe not what you'd hope for. So those firm foundations are pretty critical. Let's take a break and come back, because I'd love for you to unpack that just a bit more. During this short break, I have a special invitation to all school leaders, administrators, and teachers. I want you to imagine for a moment stepping away from your everyday routine at school and diving deep into the rich foundations of Christian education, surrounded by world-class scholars, seasoned classroom teachers, and administrative experts with years of experience running schools with a lot of wisdom to share. That's exactly what the Herzog Foundation's Institute is offering. I've had the joy of serving as a training coach for the last few years, leading their 2.5-day training on spiritual formation and another one on parent engagement. They offer close to 50 unique training events ranging from board governance to marketing to classroom best practices. They even offer a training on how to teach the great books. And the best part of all, well, thanks to the generosity of the Herzog Foundation, these training events, including lodging, are completely free for Christian educators. Institutes are located around the country in beautiful locations, including at the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C., and the Reagan Library in Santa Barbara. Don't miss this incredible opportunity. Check out the details at theherzogfoundation.com. Today's episode of Basecamp Live is brought to you by my friend Chris Casper, who you heard on a recent episode. His invention, the Wise Phone, is a much-needed third way, providing a solution from the dangers of a smartphone on the one hand and the limited capacities of an old-school flip phone on the other. His simple, distraction-free phone design for families who want technology to serve their real lives and give us and our older children a way to do basic essentials like calling or texting or maps without the web browser and the social media and the endless apps that can pull them and us into the addictive time-wasting aspects of a smartphone. I personally have a Wise phone, and I can vouch that it is an excellent solution and an appropriate way to use technology that supports virtue and focus and healthy habits. Check out the link in our show notes and on our Basecamp Live website partners page, where Chris is offering Basecamp Live listeners a discount. Josh, I was saying right before break that we really are sheeple. We really are people that are influenced by those around us. God wired us that way. And therefore, when you're with a group of students and you're having this conversation, trying to awaken them to what does it mean to have a firm foundation and to be in the world but not of the world, what does that look like? How does that conversation unflow? How does that conversation flow?
Well, one of the main bases is worldview, and as I said before, I'm a Colson Fellow, so that's what the Colson Center does. But so many students rely on individualized perspectives. They see it on TV, they see it in the media. That they're watching Taylor Swift throw her opinion around, and it becomes gold. And truth doesn't really work that way. And when you're in a group of students where they can understand what the truth is, they start relating themselves to the truth instead of just saying, well, this is my truth and this is what I think about it. And so I would say the kind of basis is a biblical worldview. I think in classical Christian education, we talk about the influence of the Western Christian paideia, the centrality of Christ throughout history. And we see it in, Greco-Roman society. We see it translate through the Enlightenment. But that's the reality. That's the world as it is. A God who intercedes with his creation, who works in and through people in history, in time, for the good of his purpose. And when we ask questions, we're trying to appeal to the Almighty's wisdom, which is way higher than ours. And as much as we can understand it, the authority that he's given to us through his word, through his spirit. I think when we get together in that moment of community and we're really relating to the truth and we give it the authority it should have, we get to see pieces of the world as it truly is. We get to see that it was created. There was a fall. Christ came for redemption. There's restoration for us. We get to understand hope, truth, identity, calling. I think in a classical sense, of a lot of students, we constantly talk about truth, beauty, and goodness. And they're like, what is that? So one of the things I do with our classical school in Bernie is I'm an art docent. So I go through art history and I'm talking to them and I'm like, why is this painting from Rembrandt beautiful to you versus why is this painting from Degas? What's the translation between these two? And I always joke with them that 100 years ago, kids never had an opinion. So tell me your opinion because I want to hear it, and they laugh and they're like, okay, so they share their ideas, but trying to relate it back to where is this common thread of truth that comes from God instead of what comes from our fantasies or what we're conditioned to think because we see things consistently in our world. And I think that biblical worldview is a basis. It produces something different in our lives. We have so many people looking for the good of their own purpose. They're trying to reconstruct after they've deconstructed the world around them by subjective reality. Yeah. And when you shine that up to the light of truth, it just seems very hollow in my experience. And the kids see that too. Students understand that there's weight to this. And I think that's one of the reasons why they connect with certain teachers in their time is that they have teachers who speak weighty about certain things and it carries forward into them. They're not afraid going, oh, well, this is just somebody who's 12. They're not going to understand this. But to the 12-year-old that connects to, they'll look back at that teacher and say, wow, that teacher in 6th grade really changed the direction of where I went as a young person.
And it sounds like at a basic level, and this, I think maybe we're at a point now in our culture where we should assume nothing in the sense that no one has really defined what is true, good, and beautiful. We throw these terms around. So when you're talking to young people, just painting the contrast very clearly. There is a world in which you're the center of everything, and it's all individualism, and it's small t truth, and then there's capital T truth. It's the way the world works. And I think that just as you're saying that, I think we maybe assume too often it's obvious, but it's not obvious to a lot of people today. You have to define those distinctives.
You do. And I think that's why we have a kind of a proliferation of echo chambers, is that you get these little communities of people that are all rallying around an opinion. They're all rallying around a perspective or an idea, but there's no lasting permanence to it. And when the next good idea comes along, they jump ship and they go to the other one. And so we end up with these kind of tribal experiences.
Yeah.
And I think we're trying to instill something better in our students, something where they're anchored in the word. They're not just, it's not perspective. It's not nuance. It's not semantics. It's the authority of God, a God who loves them and knows them. And they can find that trustworthy, and they can find purpose through that. And
Well, one of the things that I find most concerning as I look at the culture today, I get your opinion on this. I mean, we've all probably heard the term, postmodernism. There was this, it just sort of broad sweeps of things have happened in the last 50 years. I mean, there was a moment where the average person on the street in kind of in a modern era had some sense that there was true things and there were, there's good and there was evil. There's true good and there was a structural assumption across the culture. And then you go into a postmodern world where you fall into this more individualistic. Of late, I've come across this term metamodernism, and it's probably the most scary of all because it's basically saying that we live in a world where 2 + 2 is 5 and no one cares. It really doesn't matter. It is your own truth. It's meta, meaning it's just shifting. And so the concern, and I don't know what we do about this, but I think there are certainly instances where you have kids that are in wonderful Christian schools and homes, and they're politely nodding their heads saying, I love everything here. I love your worldview. I love your truth. But then they'll go off for the overnight with the team, travel team peers. And all of a sudden they're into a whole different worldview, whole different way of seeing the world. And it's almost like, is it wrong to speak Spanish or English? These are just different languages. Is it wrong to have different worldviews? So do you see this sort of a willingness to just adopt contradictory or very inconsistent worldviews as being okay with a lot of young people? And then what's the antidote to that?
I don't know if they're okay with it. I don't know if they really understand the implication of kind of being that way. To put it, I guess, in contrast to like the 50s, to think of, I don't know, the battle between the guys in the Letterman's jackets and the guys who are wearing leather jackets. Right. You could draw a distinction and say, I'm a part of this group. I kind of would consider myself an amateur sociologist, anthropologist. I'm supremely intrigued by it. But I would say with metamodernism, the magic word is oscillating. And so people are oscillating between these different ideas and values. And it really is kind of born out of this. The burden is on you to make and define purpose for your life. And I think that's one of the blessings of any Christian education, but specifically classical Christian education. Lately, the focus has been on virtues. You're anchoring these ideas and how you live around these ideas. You could say it's oscillating around values or oscillating around virtues. But the reality is, in my mind, is that instead of someone having to go pick and choose, I like kindness, I like this, whatever it may be, you're saying that this is anchored in God, who ultimately anchored the universe in his plan. And it seems like there's more continuity between that and what you can access all around you instead of having to make it up on your own.
Right.
And I think that's going to be what stands the test of time, is that you feel like you're kind of on this journey, and this journey that doesn't have any static elements. You have things that you're vacillating between. You're deciding this or that. I think at the heart of most students, they crave consistency.
Yeah, absolutely.
They look back and they are upset about maybe the discipline that they got when they were young, but then they get older and they see what it looks like when someone didn't get disciplined and how out of control they maybe feel or are.
Right.
And they look back and they're thankful for that. And I think that's one of the benefits as we get older, is that we do see the hidden gems that we didn't really understand at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think with metamodernism, there are some scary things out there, especially because it kind of goes back to making yourself the authority. Right. And if you're the authority, I mean, that gets really dicey even when it comes to seeing God. One of the things that always stands out to me is that Matthew 7, depart from me, I never knew you. That's a unique wording, particularly to think there are so many people who have taken a piece of Jesus and a piece here, and they've crafted their own version of God to follow and worship. And that's a hard thing to think that in the Bible it says, hey, you weren't following me. I didn't know you. You crafted this thing that you made and you worshiped it. And I think one of the best things that we get out of revealing a biblical worldview and a good foundation for students is that they then have a frame of reference to go forward.
Right. And I think to your point, students and all of us as humans know in the still quiet moments, is this really satisfying? And there's an emptiness to, you come to the end of yourself, and yet there's something transformative and beautiful about, an infinite personal God who died for you that you can know. I mean, there's no way you can compete with that against yourself.
Absolutely.
Totally different. Well, we've talked about students. Let's shift for a second and talk about just parents, because obviously this is the great task of the parent, is to prepare our children to move out into the world. And what are some points of wisdom that you're focusing on here in the book and just in your general practices to parents?
I think there's two main ones. Kind of this idea that with Christ-centered living and purpose and accountability, this is a leadership principle, but it applies to parents. You live in the fishbowl. The goldfish that's in the bowl gets seen on all sides. And unfortunately, what's paired with that is monkey see, monkey do. So if we're living with these truths in our own lives as parents, our kids are going to see them and understand, hey, there's consistency there. There's peace. There's other things. If we're volatile and we're, losing our minds over different things, we're going to see probably a rise in drama. I think one of the things that the classical schools do that's a really amazing part of this are things like table talks. Go home with things to actually sit down and engage your kids, speak, wrestle through it with them. And I think that bleeds into the next one, which is kind of reasoning over principle. I grew up in a because I said so house. There's nothing wrong inherently with a because I said so house. I think the harder part today is that because I said so can be a challenge to figure out why you're wrong. Mm-hmm. And when you go through these things and you reason, you give understanding, instruction, inspiration, instead of just a principle, we don't do this because of this. That principle, they may keep the principle and it may get them a certain distance, but when push comes to shove, when they're in that other group and they're with the, maybe the travel ball crew and other things are happening, that principle may get very quiet versus the reason of like, I don't really want this to be a part of my life. I'm going to go ahead and just let you guys do what you're going to do. And I'm going to be okay over here and not feel like I have to.
And I think the parent, we've talked on many episodes just about the reality, we say the word parent, but parenting is not static. I mean, you have very dramatically different ages and stages. If you're parenting a 6-year-old in first grade, it's a very different moment in their time and in yours than if it's a junior in high school. And I think that is part of the problem, is that we want to be that kind of confident, consistent, strong voice in those younger years to provide that structure. But there is a need to come alongside them, not in a quote friendship way, but maybe a bit more vulnerability. If these are real struggles, these are things we're having to deal with in the world, it is broken. And so how do you figure out, I think that's one of the tensions. How do you know what is an appropriate maybe level of vulnerability or honesty as a parent with your child?
Yeah. I think obviously children are different. So, I only have one. God only trusted my wife and I with one child. So, but I hear stories for people that their first couple are one way and their second couple are another way. And I think that's also part of that communal side when we're showing people how to build with community. Or how to build community. There are so many places where community is unique because people are unique. And I think there's that place. It's also another realistic approach in parenting is that there are so many situations where there isn't a one size fits all solution for how we go forward. And whether maybe in school you've got a student who is just smart as a whip and they get everything and no problem, and they very rarely have homework, and they get it all done in study hall, and another one that really struggles through a subject that you got to sit down and work with them. You know those things and you navigate them differently. But I think emotionally, ideologically, we're in a space where there may be need for that too. Especially, I've got a headstrong daughter. There's that place where we reason through some things, and oddly enough, she gets some of that from me. So I know those collisions in the mind that are like, hey, I'm trying to reason this. Yeah. I'm trying to understand this. Let's sift through it together.
And that's part of, I think, again, what the big takeaway I'm hearing is we just need to be intentional. You talk about table talk. We talk about just having conversations and not outsourcing our parenting to the school. And even though we're never going to be perfect about it, just making every effort to go on the journey with our child, especially as they get into those more inquisitive years. And I think sometimes it's not that complicated. It's just being willing to be available and get off your phone as the parent and all those things that we have to do. Actually be present when you're present. Let's take another break. I want to come back and in this final section, get your input to educators, because there's so many of us that are in that important role, kind of that 7:30 to 3 window. And how can we help form these firm foundations? We'll be right back after the break.
Hi there, classical Christian parents, students, and teachers. This is Robert Littlejohn, co-author with Charles Evans of Wisdom and Eloquence, a Christian paradigm for classical learning, published by Crossway Books. We want you to know about our new book with well-known family counselor Keith McCurdy, published by Classical Academic Press. The book is titled Wisdom and Eloquence for Parents: How Classical Christian Education Can Transform Your Children, Your Family, and the World. We have written this shorter, parent-focused book specifically as an admissions and parent education resource for schools and families. We are excited to be proud sponsors of Zipcast and Basecamp Live, and we hope you are enjoying these two great resources for classical learning as much as we are. And we would invite you to visit our website, wisdomandeloquence.org, to explore the various services offered by the authors of Wisdom and Eloquence for Parents, and to let us know how we can best serve you. We look forward to hearing from you soon.
Every school year tells a story, but the quieter pages often go unread. A science experiment that sparks wonder, a teacher guiding perseverance, moments parents long to hear. Zipcast brings those stories to light. Each 10 to 12-minute episode blends local updates from your school with wisdom from national parenting and education experts that addresses the questions parents long to have answered. Nearly 100 schools are using Zipcast this year, and fall or winter can be the perfect time to begin. Learn more at zipcast.media. Zipcast, encouraging you on the go with what you need to know.
Josh, in the few minutes we have left, talk a little bit about wisdom and advice you have to educators who are in a classroom environment trying to form worldview in students.
Yeah. So I think there's a couple basic things that they're not basic, but a couple things that I like to think about. I'm a big proponent of the in loco parentis. And I actually really enjoy, I think I mentioned before, the care that my daughter got in classical education. That's a piece that there's this partnership that we have. It doesn't come immediately. We learn. And not only do we learn, but our students learn. And I think one of those pieces for our educators is that integrated understanding. It's not always in the environment of the classroom. Relevance isn't usually the number one thing talked about. It's the information that we're trying to kind of get into the brain. But I think a lot of times when we're translating that, it can be revealing perspectives, and opinions come in. And I think there's a transition to kind of seeing truth. So we're showing the truth of what this is rather than, hey, what do you think about this? Obviously, what do you think about this is a very important question, because we want them to interact mentally with it. But at the same time, if we're not revealing the truth to lead them to where they should make their observation, that can be, it can start them down a different pathway of trying to understand the world around them. I think one of the things that's kind of come out lately, I would say the Colson Educators Program is a good resource just for relaying foundational elements in frameworks of truth. So you asking good questions: what is good that I can promote? What is an evil that I should resist? What's missing I can contribute? What's broken that I can restore? These are things that, all of these, the classes that come, the Herzog Foundation does them, you and Keith in your road shows, these places where educators are sharpening their own skills so that they can help their students see truth rather than just, kind of engage perspective. And then I think the other aspect is engaging in the discussion. Your students' lives are going to be impacted way further than probably you expect by things you're not expecting in the class. I think of at our school my daughter goes to the Geneva School of Bernie, and one of the superstar teachers there is Mr. Poole. And it's amazing to hear how many kids come home talking about Mr. Poole and the Harkness table and how they're feeling platformed to understand things. And, in the idea of abstraction, once kids get into logic school, they can start doing some of the abstractions. And by the time they're in rhetoric, they should be familiar enough to understand the difference between concrete and abstract thought. And, some of those elements of rigor, they translate down to little discussions that they'll have with their friends. Some of those aspects where they're able to take a concept and communicate it back to you as a parent and be like, where did you get that? And they're going to be like, oh, well, we were talking about King Arthur, and this is how, this is right. How the knight felt about their duty, and just unique things and pieces. And I think as educators, you may be just doing a lesson plan or think that here's a highlight from the story. But what you're really doing is helping those kids get a firm foundation and empowering them through seeing those truths, and rather than just opinions that right. They're going to go out and share with their friends. They're going to bring back to their parents. It's going to richly bless them. So
it's such an, teaching is such an art, because you don't want to have an environment that's just, I think kind of the stereotypical conservative Christian school has been, here's the 5 Bible verses now we need to memorize based on this truth that we're learning. And it's very mechanistic, as opposed to kind of a living conversation where you're taking a King Arthur discussion and there's complexity in just unpacking the human experience and our sinfulness, and yet ultimately linking it back to truth. And I think that's one of the great, as you were describing earlier, the problem of kind of leading someone up to a truth moment, but then never really putting the final dots together. And so I think a lot of times you have Socratic discussions in high school that are, I would say it's like bad talk radio. Everybody's kind of throwing their opinions around and no one ever lands the thing back into truth. And so how do you do that without it being too prescriptive and, I guess, fundamentalist in a sense, at the same time being able to help students awaken themselves to what is true truth? So there's definitely some work of the Holy Spirit probably in these conversations to make it all come together.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, that's good. Well, Josh, this has been a great conversation. We could keep going. There's so much more. Your book is a fantastic resource, and subtitled Firm Foundations for Life. Folks can get this, I assume, on Amazon.
On Amazon and on my website, which is just joshuaweir.com. There's more articles, other ideas. I think the basis of having transform people, cultivate transformation in the world is an awesome thing. And so, yeah.
Well, it's such an important work you're doing, and your resources are excellent. So there's details in the show notes, and love to continue the conversation with you in the future. There's a lot here that we didn't even have a chance to jump into, but thanks for your great work.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime. Thanks, Davies.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Basecamp Live. Be sure to check out our website, basecamplive.com, for more than 8 years of timeless episodes that you'll find helpful and encouraging, as well as the helpful resources offered on our partners page. The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of our partners like the Herzog Foundation. See you back next week.